Hello everybody, it's Claudia Manchanda, Radical Herbalist. A bit pissed off because I just did a whole video that I hadn't even pressed record on, so now I'm doing it again and hopefully it's better this time round. The herb I'm doing is a herb of Jupiter, which means that it's expansive and helps push through blockages spiritually or blockages in the body. It's a herb that helps with the herbal term detoxification, and even though the body always is in a state of detoxification, that's what your liver and your kidneys do, it promotes detoxification and it promotes digestive secretions. It promotes elimination of feces and the activity of digestive enzymes, and it promotes building the blood, and it's a herb for anemia. And it's also called a weed, and a weed is a herb that is unwanted by people who cultivate and control a space. And to me it's a very beautiful plant, very beautiful remedy. I love seeing it lined up on Hampstead Heath in the autumn. It's rusty colours and it's so distinctive. It produces up to 40,000 seeds per season, and one field can have millions of seeds in the ground that can actually be viable up to the whole of a human's lifetime. And the herb, which I don't call a weed, or I don't sort of have a relationship with plants where I think of them as weeds or invasive, and its name is curly dock or yellow dock or Rumex crispus, and here we have it. And the reason it's called Rumex is because they're all sour, and they all contain various acids that are sour, including oxalic acid and vitamin C, which is a ascorbic acid. And it's called curly dock because if you look at the edges of the leaves, they're curly. And it's called yellow dock because when you harvest the taproot, which is the main medicine that Western herbalists use it for, and you dig it up with a fork, you wash it and then slice it into circles. The circles are yellow with sort of bitter alkaloids and anthocyanins, or anthraquinones rather, and the leaves are also used as food and in some medicine systems, but different types of Rumexes have different flavours. So this one is definitely more acidic, and the young leaves can be added to salads. I wouldn't eat the older leaves, especially if you're prone to sort of kidney stones or any kind of stone formation, even though the root, which isn't high in oxalic acids, is used to move stones. Here is the flower of the plant, and it doesn't have a sort of archetypal petally flower, but this isn't actually the seed, this is the flower. Let's have a look. We go in. There you go, there's a flowering curly dock. You can see its flower. Other names for this plant, let's see if I can go out again. Other names for this plant include Pariel, Rhubarbe sauvage, Turel. Pliny the Elder calls it sorrel. It's called Krauser Ampher. It's called Chaka or Amalvelas, Lenga de Vaca, Chin Chiao Mei, Patience, Mengelwurz, Wilder Mangold, Zitterwarts, which I think means bitter herb, and it's in the buckwheat family, which is called Polygonaceae, or knotweed family. There's another dock round the corner that's much wider, and that's called bitter dock or broadleaf dock, and that's the one that's used for nettle stings. And if you want to use docks for nettle stings, you actually break the leaf off at this point and you get the sap. And another characteristic of docks is, can you see where I'm actually pointing the camera? Where there's like the leaf stalks are coming out, there's a big papery fold here, and that means you've got one of the Rumexes. I don't know if you can see the papery fold. So it can be eaten, yeah, as a salad, but over the year oxalates accumulate, so be careful. And the seeds can be harvested. I'll try and find some seeds to put in this video to show you. But it's the kind of thing it's nice to do in a group, because the seed, that looks a bit like buckwheat, comes with like a chaff, like a covering, pardon me, and it's quite a laborious process to actually harvest the seeds, and then you'd have to grind it down into a flour, and the flour is very protein rich. Sheep, cows and goats love to eat it, but horses don't. I'm not sure why horses don't like it. So in herbal medicine, it's considered a bitter. There are some herbs that are far more bitter, like gentian or wormwood, but it's a decent bitter. And in herbal medicine, there's a saying, or maybe it's a saying I say, but it's bitter is better. And bitter's like a sharp, pungent taste. It's not sweet, it doesn't have a smell. Bitter's also a feeling of anger or inner hurt or unjust, and it's always been related to the liver. And you know, in English language you can say something like the bitter truth. Ancient Egyptians soaked bitters in vats of wine, and bitter herbs include volatile oils, alkaloids, diterpenes, sesquiterpenes, loads of quite famous chemicals are bitter. Like a lot of phytoestrogens are bitter, and quercetin is bitter. And basically what happens is, when you have things that taste bitter in your mouth, it stimulates something called the vagus nerve, and the vagus nerve then stimulates secretion of saliva in your mouth, and that action, that pharmacological action, is called an aperient. And aperients, you know, start the digestive secretions throughout the glands that secrete these secretions, acids, neutralizing components like bile, and helps you digest your food and eliminate waste really easily. So an aperient is also a very mild laxative, not a purging laxative, but a mild laxative. So if you have a bitter, it starts with the secretion of saliva. It increases the pepsin and hydrochloric acid in your stomach. It increases duodenal secretions, pancreatic secretions. It helps you break down fats. It is choleretic, which means it helps the liver to release bile into the gallbladder. If you don't have a gallbladder, bile tends to be a bit less concentrated, and it may be difficult to process really rich foods if you've had your gallbladder removed. So it's quite good to have choleretics. It's cholagogic. So cholagogic means that it makes the flow from your gallbladder to be more. It may help with your insulin and glucagon balance. And then we also have something called extraoral bitter receptors. And they are receptors that bind to, they're called G protein receptors. So not only do we have basically like, when bitter chemicals touch our taste buds and send off these kind of cascade of effects, it happens when these bitter chemicals react with receptors in our brain, in our heart, in our spinal cord, in our lungs. And some bitters are expectorants and they make you cough up phlegm in your chest, and some bitters are relaxing. Some respond with nerve fibers and send nerve signals, And there's probably a lot more about bitters that we don't actually know. But what I was reading about yesterday is that 50% of all pharmaceutical drugs bind with bitter receptors. So bitters are very medicinal products, and they're probably a response to poisons, because many alkaloids which are poisons are bitter. And then you also have humans who are super tasters, and they are very sensitive to tasting bitter and to tasting salt as well. And apparently super tasters are very good at tasting the bitter chemicals in food that's been damaged by fungus. So it's obviously like a sort of survival mechanism in the body. Another interesting effect of bitters is that activation of the TAS2RS receptors relaxes something called the detrusor muscle in the bladder. So if someone has an overactive bladder and needs to pee all the time, some bitter herbs will actually relax the sensory nerves in the bladder, making less urgent urination. Another study showed that activation of HTASR 14 and R40 receptors inhibits glioblastoma, neuroblastoma, gastric carcinoma, colorectal cancer, pancreatic cancer, thyroid cancer, breast cancer, and myeloma. So when I talk about the traditional use of this herb, it's actually going to tally with some of the studies, and I'll talk more about the studies afterwards. So the traditional use of burdock root is as a bitter, and the bitter, as I've just said, causes a whole cascade of biological effects. It stimulates bile, and bile is made in the liver and released and put in and then dropped into a bag called the gallbladder, and bile breaks down fats and neutralizes acids that are made in the small intestine. It's choleretic and cholagogic, so it increases the volume of bile produced from the liver and stimulates the flow, not a drip effect, but a concentrated effect, helping effective digestion, and that reduces bloating. It's a mineral donor. The plant carries loads of minerals, not just as a food, but in the root too. It's a blood cleanser, a herb of Jupiter. It helps the formation of blood cells, and it's a herb that's used for anemia. And later in the year, the seeds turn reddish colour, and the leaves often have like blotches of red, which is a signature for blood. It means the herb has an affinity for working with the blood. A lot of herbs have that red signature. As I said, it accumulates with the oxalates, so it is the root that is used as a herb for anemia, and it's also often mixed with other herbs. I'll give you that recipe afterwards. It's used as a mild laxative, not a cathartic laxative, which would actually, make you run to the toilet several times and just sort of purge your guts. It supports a healthy liver, digestion, detoxification, and homeostasis. Traditionally, it's been used in remedies for cancer, and there's a recipe called Scudder's alterative, and an alterative is a herb that changes direction from like a negative state to homeostasis. And Scudder's alterative contains cordialis tuber, black alder bark, may apple root, figwort flower, and yellow dock root. It's a herb that's also traditionally used for itching, particularly of things that are red and angry, like angry eczema or itchy psoriasis or itchy eczema or itching piles. It's a herb that's been used traditionally for itching. It's also been used for fungal infections internally and externally. When the root is prepared, it's usually dried, and this converts the chemicals into more effective medicine, and then that powder can be used. And I like to use the powder of this plant's root in anything that's weeping, a weeping wound, wet athlete's foot, maybe even a tumour that's open, a fungating tumour. You can put the dry powder on it and it will have an anti-cancer effect, it will have an antimicrobial effect, it will have a healing effect. As the herb is bitter, like many anthelminthic, it's an anti-worm remedy. Wormies in your intestines do not like bitters. It's also an anti-arthritic herb, and it's traditionally been used for sexually transmitted infections and topically for herpes lesions type 1 and type 2. It's also been used for fibroids and disorders of intestinal transit, so that means constipation and also even diarrhea. It's not a herb I would use in pregnancy for constipation or for anemia, but it is a herb that I would probably use post-pregnancy, and obviously not in like huge amounts if someone's breastfeeding, but it's something I might add in a mix to help with anemia postpartum. If someone was pregnant, was constipated in pregnancy, I'd go for bulking laxatives, I'd go for beetroot, I'd go for dandelion root. So the herb contains these chemicals in the roots called anthraquinones. It also contains amino acids, cysteine, glutamic acid, histidine. The leaf contains a chemical that's in aloe vera called emodin, but in much smaller amounts than aloe, and it's not really that present in the root. The oxalates of the plant are reduced when cooking, so baby leaves could be used in the spring in stews. They're mineral rich. The plant also has tannins, and tannins help with diarrhea. It contains a slight amount of essential oil, and it contains the chemical rumecin and lapothin. It also contains, as I said before, some sour acids like brastinic acid, lapthanic acid, chrysofaric acid, oxalic acid. It contains the vitamins A, B and C, and the B vitamins are thiamine, riboflavin and niacin. Laboratory studies tally with the traditional use that I've mentioned before. All of the plants tested showed antibacterial activity, but the root was the most antibacterial, so that tallies with the traditional use as well, and how we use the plant in herbal medicine. We mainly use the root. And the bacteria that were tested in the study that I looked at, I think it was alcoholic extracts, were K. pneumoniae, E. coli, Staph aureus, Bacillus cereus and Streptococcus pyogenes, so that's gram negative and gram positive. It also was active against cholera and P. aeruginosa. It was also demonstrated parasitic, anti-parasitic activity, and they compared it to chloroquine, and chloroquine was actually from a plant derived from cinchona, but chloroquine is a pharmaceutical that's a bitter neurotoxic, anti-malarial and anti-rheumatic drug, and the yellow dock extract compared as well to that for trypanosoma and plasmodium, which is the malaria parasite. It also inhibited HeLa cells, which are the cervical cancer cell lines of Henrietta Lacks. Let's not remember Henrietta Lacks. I mentioned her in the Yarrow video. In homeopathy, Rumex crispus is used for a cough with the tickly sensation, and a cough that's worsened when someone is laughing. And you know, sometimes when you have a cough and you try and have a drink and you nearly choke because you're laughing, and it's just like a really unpleasant feeling of just like having an uncontrollable cough. This remedy is used for that. It's used for very thick phlegm, violent sneezing. A particular with this plant is early morning diarrhea, so waking up with diarrhea, enlarged lymph nodes. So it would be like a whole picture of all those. If those things were sort of going on at a similar time, then you'd think Rumex crispus. Spiritually, the significance of the plant is to clear emotional blockages and cut ties with negative attachments. It's used for periods of transition, where the transition is just like not happening, it's going on and on and on. And I wonder, because I've never done it, but I wonder if the flower remedy of this plant works in that way. In the book by Peter Holmes called The Energetic of Western Herbs, Peter Holmes describes the plant as mild with minimal toxicity. It's cold, dry, dissolving, decongesting, restoring and astringing. The tropism, or the affinity in the body, is to the fluid, the blood, the lymph, or the lymphatics, which is the liquid. The lymph is the liquid of the lymphatics. The intestines, the pancreas, the kidneys, the liver, the skin, the large intestine, and the fluid body. So that's all the fluids in the body. How fantastic is that, to have a herb that has affinities to so many parts of our bodies? It's taken in a decoction, a tincture, a compress, a wash, a vaginal douche, a sponge, or a pessary. It's good for all biotypes, so that's all constitutions. And in Chinese traditional medicine terms, it clears damp heat, it clears toxic heat, reducing inflammation and discharge. It resolves damp, and that's like when I was talking about, you know, fungal situations, phlegmy situations. It dissolves stones. It promotes urination, so that's part of detoxification. It reduces acidosis, which happens in cancer, and it's alkalizing. It vitalizes the blood. It reduces tumours, which in medicine doesn't just mean cancer, but also hard blocking areas. It restores the blood. It moderates menstruation. It clears wind damp like eczema, and it's good for swollen lymph nodes. So that tallies with the Western interpretation as well. So I've already said to you that the herb the root is collected, and I often would collect it in the spring when it's got baby leaves that look like a rosette, and then would wash it and dry it, and I'd get it from an unpolluted area. And I like it earlier on in the year because it's actually a bit less bitter, and it has less bioaccumulation of oxalates, and it's dried and chopped and dehydrated. And then I like it as an aperitif, so to have before meals, to stimulate digestion before you eat. I also like the idea of having any bitters as an aperitif or as a prelude to meals. So it could be a little bitter salad, it could be a spray. I like bitter sprays. I love gentian spray, and you literally, if you just don't want to eat a salad, you squirt the bitter into your mouth and it starts the digestive process, which helps regulate blood sugar. The powder of the root can be used to apply to athlete's foot or open sores or herpes lesions, or an ointment can be made with the powder for the same kind of things. There's a recipe that's used often with wine or rum or ethanol, and water for iron deficiency anemia, and that's made with blackstrap molasses, nettles, dandelion leaves, bitter citrus peel and dried apricots. Now, if you didn't have alcohol, you could swap the alcohol for apple cider vinegar, or you could use those ingredients like blended together as a decoction, but it wouldn't preserve. And I wouldn't decoct the leaves as such, I'd blend them in, but I might decoct the citrus peel and dried apricots. And also the nettle leaves, the dandelion leaves, the citrus peel could also be used as a tea. Most often the herb is made in prescriptions with complementary herbs, and Western herbalists probably most often use it in a tincture form. I like using it in drop forms in water. I'm now going to read from The Complete Herbal by Nicholas Culpeper, from the 1700s, 16th century herbalist, radical herbalist. Many kinds of these are so well known that I shall not trouble you with a description of them. My book grows too fast. Government and virtues. All docks are under Jupiter, of which red dock is commonly called bloodwort, cleanses the blood and strengthens the liver. But the yellow dock, it's best taken when either the blood or liver is affected by choler. All of them have a kind of cooling but not alike drying quality, the sorrel being the most cold, the bloodwort's most drying. Of the burdock I have spoken already by itself. The seed of most other kinds, whether the gardens or fields, do stay lax and fluxes of all sorts, the loathings of the stomach through choler, and is helpful for those that spit blood. The roots boiled in vinegar help the itch, scabs, and breaking out of the skin. If it be bathed therewith, the distilled water of the herb and roots have the same virtue, and cleanses the skin from freckles, morphules, and all other spots and discolourings therein. All docks being boiled with meat make it boil sooner. Besides, bloodwort is exceedingly strengthening to the liver and procures good blood, being a wholesome pot as any growing in the garden. Yet such is the nicety of our times, forsooth, that women will not put it into a pot because it makes the pottage black. Pride and ignorance, a couple of monsters in the creation, preferring nicety before health. Preferring nicety before health. So I just ended that video by saying humans prefer nicety over health. And it's in our makeup to prefer sweet things to bitter things, and capitalism has capitalized on that, and not wanting bitter things is probably part of our survival instinct. As I said earlier, that, you know, some super tasters can taste very micro amounts of bitter, and that happens when food goes off and rotten, and also many poisons are bitter. But plants have been into bread to take away the bitter flavour. Like years ago, even when the Gerson therapy was made, carrots were not sweet, they were bitter. And lots of our green veg like broccoli and that mustard family were very, very bitter. And we've now become so acquainted to things tasting sweet. Like, you know, if you cook the stem of a broccoli, it's like sugary and sweet. And a lot of bitter chemicals are chemoprotective. They stimulate digestion and they protect us against cancer. So what I wanted to say was just a way of promoting health and your well-being is to introduce bitter aperitifs, and nibbling on bitter leaves, drinking teas that are bitter. Most cultures have herbal bitters and digestive bitters, and perhaps in the springtime get into having daily bitters. Look at your diet and think, is it very carbohydrate rich, sweet rich? And think about, do I eat enough bitters every day? Do I stimulate my digestion every day? Do I have sluggish digestion? Do I get bloated easily? Do I get constipated and piles easily? And a simple way of just promoting your digestive health is to introduce bitter foods, and that can be even some cruciferous veg, and especially ones that are bought from farmers markets, and they're far less sweet. Things like kale and Cavello Nero. And if you find it very fibrous, take out the inner rib from the plant and just peel off the leafy bits and cut them up tiny. Bitter oranges, amazing source of bitters. Lemons and limes, obviously not ones with wax on because that's not good for you, but you can make teas with lemon and lime. And then there's the bitter herbs, the berberine containing herbs, and our beautiful, my friend, the yellow dock. Here we have curly dock, and you could tell it's curly dock or yellow dock because, can you see, it's all curled up around the edges. It has the same Rumex white rib in the middle of the lanceolate leaf. It's got a skinny leaf, unlike the broadleaf one, and you can see it is actually flowering. I don't know if you can get in to see the flowers, but they're really, oops, there you go, you can see the flowers of the Rumex crispus, and it's called yellow dock because it has a long taproot that is there in the ground. I'm not going to dig it up now, and it's the taproot that's mostly used as medicine, and yeah, it's one of the Rumex family. This is bitter dock, Rumex obtusifolius, and it's the one that is used to soothe stinging nettles. And you don't actually just rub the leaf, you snip off the leaf at its stem and get the sap to rub on. It's also known as bitter dock.